Hello students, welcome to Civil Services Prime Time by CivicCentre IAS. Today we will discuss about the important topics from international relations perspective, which is equally important for your both prelims and mains perspective. Let's try to understand what were the different issues that were plaguing Indian economy at the same time because of these external events. The topics are briefly 5 topics that I have taken. The first one is rise in India's external debt. So it is a regular and recurring event because most of the times just like how India is managing its debt domestically, in a similar way it has taken loans from different institutions from across the globe. Second one, UAE introduces sugar tax on promote to public health to promote the healthy well-being of the citizens. United Arab Emirates has introduced a sugar tax. So there are different types of countries promoting this type of sugar tax, especially because of excessive sugar consumption will take a health effects. Third one is what is Mecca Charter, just like United Nations Charter, how it is going to be work in real time. In a similar way, Saudi Arabia has proposed a Mecca Charter, especially for the community of Islam. How it will affect India and what are the different relations between Saudi Arabia and India, that we will look into this article. Fourth one, global burden of diseases report. Recently, global burden of disease report was released by the Lancet journal. So according to this journal, 2/3 of world health diseases are coming from lifestyle diseases. In earlier cases, it was from infectious, whether it should be viral diseases or bacterial, any type of diseases, but it has gradually changed to the lifestyle diseases. IMF and its prediction. Next one would be IMF. So what is the projection of India's growth? What is the India's growth projection story that was recently released by IMF? The first one is rise in India's external debt. External debt has already reached 747.2 billion at the end of June 2025. What does this mean for Indian economy? So if you are keep taking loans from external sources, then obviously the repayment obligations or repayment of this debt will be very high. Sometimes even if you take any currency fluctuations, then you need to pay more than what you have taken. That is the biggest disadvantages for external debt. But one positive aspect of this external debt would be it will be utilized for your developmental purposes. But most of the times, some states or some countries, what they have taken from the loans is just they are utilizing it for day-to-day expenses, not on the capital expenditure, capex. So that is the biggest worry. So this was the data released by Reserve Bank of India, and which marks the 1.5 times increase over the previous quarter. So if you look at timeline, there are 4 quarters in a financial year: quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. So if you compare it with the previous quarter 1.5 times has been increased. That is the biggest worry. Next one, what is the current status of India's external debt? So the first one is valuation effects. Valuation effects is nothing but simply the understanding of demand and supply for our currencies. So what will make you difference? Let's suppose if you want to take any product, so based on your demand and supply, the price of that product will change, right? In a similar way, let's suppose you take loans from United States in mostly in dollars. So in repayment obligation, let's suppose the dollar value has fluctuated, then obviously you need to pay either more or less. That is the valuation effects. The increase in external debt was largely driven by valuation effects arising from currency fluctuations, right? The depreciation of the US dollar contributed to valuation of loss of $5.1 billion. If you look at recent United States dollar value to the Indian rupee, because of this depreciation, at least $5.1 billion has been lost. So if it was at the earlier stage, let's say 75 rupees or 80 rupees, then $5.1 billion would not be a great deal. Next one, debt coverage. Despite the increase in total external debt, 93% of the debt is covered by Indian forex reserves. So mostly, let's suppose we have 100% forex reserves. So coming to next year, let's suppose if you take a simple for understanding, 93% of the debt whatever we own to the different nations or different institutions already covered by Indian forex reserves. So that is very strong in India's forex reserve systems, ensuring strong external resilience, which makes even at the turbulence times the India's economy is going very slowly and steadily. The external debt to GDP ratio stands at 18.9%, which reflects the sustainable level of external debt. This is not a very issue for Indian economy because it is very sustainable in nature. Next one, debt maturity profile. What are the different types of debt? Whether it has a short term in nature or long term in nature. Long term debt, mostly maturity over 1 year, forms the $611.7 billion, while short term has declined to 18.1%. Here, mostly the long term debt is high and short term debt is very low. The short term debt to reserve ratio has improved, so that the reducing rollover and liquidity risk. So let's suppose if you take in a loan, for the longer term, the benefits will be very high. If you take a loan and you want to foreclose the loan before the date, then obviously you need to pay more interest, more penal charges. Let's suppose if you take a loan from banks. In a similar way, the short-term debt owned by Government of India does not have any rollover effects or liquidity risk in the economy. That is the good sign for Indian economy. Currency-wise composition. So what are the different types of currencies from where we are taking loans? US dollar, obviously you can expect 53.8% is the dominant currency in India's external debt. Indian rupee 30.6, because apart from India, there are some other countries also on their financial systems. Currency, Indian rupee, INR, Indian rupee is also accepted as a loan. A substantial share in domestic currency debt, that is 30.6, Japanese yen 6.6%, special drawing rights of IMF, which is a very minor portion of 4.6, Euro 3.5, a relatively smaller share. Okay, here mostly US dollar dominates the India's external debt. That's why in recent times, especially after Donald Trump came to the US president, the Indian government is reviving different types of policies, especially from Government of India and Reserve Bank of India, to internationalization of rupees, so that the currency fluctuations, especially from US dollar, will not affect the India's economic growth story. Sector-wise, non-financial corporations 36%, the largest sector reflecting in private sector external borrowings. That is the from private sector perspective. Government and financial institutions, the remaining share of external debt. So only 36% was from the private sector. Remaining would be from the government and other financial institutions also. So what are the key challenges associated with rising external debt? So we are taking continuously loans to meet our needs, right? So what will be the effect? The first one is exchange rate risk. So in earlier cases, let's say $1 is equal to 75 rupees. Now you need to repay with $1 is equal to 88 rupees. So the purchasing power, the exchange rate volatility will obviously affect the India's external repayment obligation. The external debt is mostly denominated in foreign currencies, which fluctuate the exchange rates, and the repayment burden will be very high, and which is making more expensive to the service the debt. So whenever you are taking loans in one currency, the repayment has to be done in the same currency, right? So in a similar way, there are currency fluctuations. Interest burden, rising debt increases interest obligations. No country is in a position to give a grants, just like how India is giving a grants to different island nations adjacent to the Indian Ocean. So most of the countries, especially developed countries, are giving loans and they are expecting interest. So interest burden will also increase, which put the pressure on physical resources and reducing the funds for development. If you keep on repaying interest rates for the external debts, then what about the domestic requirements, domestic developments, socio-economic developments of that country? So obviously you can compromise on that note. Prolonged inflation can lead to high interest rates also, and which in turns slowing economic growth. This can result in to further pressure on the economy. So you are keep on repaying interest to the borrower. Obviously, that will create a inflation on the economy also. The global threat of stagflation could reduce the demand for India's exports. So that's why the government is very cautiously or meticulously exposing to different countries, different treatments, different agreements under the WTO framework, so that the supply chains should not be disturbed. Let's suppose if you take an example of United States government, it has imposed 50% tariff on India's exports. Let's suppose if you diversify these exports, the risk will be mitigated at least, impacting the debt service to further complicating the debt repayment also. Crowding out domestic investment. Debt servicing may divert resources away from the productive domestic investment and welfare spending. So what does this mean? Let's suppose there are government sector and private sector. Government sector is completely taking up all money, all supply of money available in the financial institutions in the country. Then what about the private sector? So whenever the government is taking much of its loans from the domestic sources to repay the external debt, then obviously there is a very less room for private investment. So whenever there is less room for private investment, because the interest rates are shoot up. Whenever interest rates are very shoot up, obviously the private players are very discouraged to take loans from banks or other financial institutions, which will make them to crowding out from the Indian entities. That is the biggest worry for Indian economy. So what are the key measures to manage external debt? These are some of the issues that were plaguing Indian economy while you taking the loans from external sources. What are the key measures that you can suggest? Diversify currency exposure. You should not only depend upon the US economy for your exports. Rather than you can export it to the European Union nations also, so that the currency exposure will be very less. Adopt sustainable debt practices. Ensure the borrowed funds, whatever the borrowed funds, are directed towards the productive expenditures, nothing but capital expenditure. You should focus more on capital expenditure, which will yield results in a longer term and sustainable way. But most of the countries or most of the states, what they will do, they will simply take the loans and they will simply put it in the revenue expenditures for the day-to-day expenses or operating expenses. That should not be go away. Next one, extend loan maturities. Opting for long-term loans so that it should not have any liquidity risk in the short term, and a repayment burden over an extended period. So you should mostly focus on long-term repayments, long-term obligations, so that in the long term it will be beneficial, it will be sustainable for you to repay the obligations, which reduce the immediate pressure on financial. If you take a short-term loans, let's suppose less than 1 year, then obviously you need to pay both principal and interest, so which will definitely impact your physical resources available at your disposal. Next one, implement robust fiscal policies that focus on reducing deficits and at the same time controlling inflation. Why? Because most of the times we are importing from different nations, especially if you look at energy. 80 to 85% of the energy is imported from Middle East nations. So obviously it is imported inflation. To reduce the imported inflation, the government at the same time RBI has to make a policies very conducive for the Indian economy, which ensure the economic stability, which in turn reduces the external debt also. So that is the first one. Next, coming to the second discussion, UAE, United Arab Emirates, introduced sugar tax on to promote public health. To promote public health, UAE has introduced sugar tax, which will be starting from January 1, 2026. What is the major aim of this move by the UAE, for that matter, any countries? So, rise of non-communicable diseases. In earlier cases, diseases are mostly infectious in nature. But now, because of lifestyle changes and because of these lifestyle changes and climate change, and each and every aspect has changed our lives forever. That's why the one important aspect what UAE has found that better the sugar sweetened beverages should be taxed, so that the people will discourage to consume that sugar sweetened beverage. That's why they have taken this decision. Obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, these are some of the most associated risk with rising consumption of sugar. So that's why the government has taken this decision. This initiative aligns with Gulf Cooperation Council's GCC Council's regional framework for the excise on sugar sweetened beverages. Sugar sweetened beverages. What is a sugar tax? Sugar tax is a physical measure that increase the retail price of sugary drinks through taxation, or discourage excessive sugar intake and encourage healthier choice among the ingredient. How it will work? Let's suppose if you take in a Coca-Cola, the 100 ml Coca-Cola will be cost a 20 rupees. Let's suppose if you increase to 30 rupees or 40 rupees, obviously not all the people, but mostly some of the people will discourage to take a consumption on these sugar products. So that's why this sugar tax will work. Globally, countries like UK, Mexico and South Africa have introduced similar taxes with measurable declines in sugar drink consumption. That is the positive side of the story, right? These countries have introduced the taxes, but at the same time, they have reduced the consumption. They have clearly viewed the declining consumption of sugar beverages. That is the good sign to adapt in any country to discourage the sugar. India's approach. India already imposes one of the world's highest tax burdens on sugary drinks, including 28% GST, 40% on sin tax, and 12% on compensation cess. These were from India's approach. Together, these aim to discourage consumption. The positive aspect would be discourage consumption and offset healthcare cost linked to lifestyle diseases. So, if you look at, let's suppose the government is making arrangements for your health, whether under the Ayushman Bharat or health and wellness centers, the burden on government will increase if you constantly having these diseases. So obviously to offset the healthcare cost, especially, the government has taken this decision. India's measures align with the World Health Organization's recommendations to physical tools for improving public health outcomes. Here, physical tools are nothing but taxation. So one aspect is taxation. So by using taxation, the government is making the people to discourage taking of sugary drinks. So what is GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council? It is a regional political and economic alliance established in 1981. So just like how another organizations, just like NATO, just like any other organizations are working, in a similar way for the Gulf area, the Gulf Cooperation Council has established. Member countries mostly Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. These were the member countries. What is the major objective? To foster economic activities among the regional group and security, cultural and social cooperation among its members. So mostly the objectives will be very clear. Fostering the economic cooperation and culture, socio-economic developments among these groupings. Historical context. The GCC was formed in response to escalating regional tensions, especially Iranian Revolution 1979 and Iran-Iraq War 1982-1988. These were the background where the Gulf Cooperation Council comes into the picture. So what is the relation between India and Gulf Cooperation Council? The GCC states are among India's key suppliers of energy. So just now in starting of this video, I have discussed about most of our energy imports are directly made from these Gulf nations, especially oil. Annual remittances from Indians in these countries are worth US $4.8 billion. Remittances. So the working population which were working in another countries, these are generally known as remittances. From Middle East region itself, for annually the remittances are $4.8 billion.
Hello everyone. As you all know, Civil Services Prime Time is one of its kind initiative where we are teaching the students current affairs related to that particular subject one day at a time. అంటే ఒక వారంలో జరిగిన కరెంట్ అఫైర్స్ అన్ని ఒక సబ్జెక్ట్ కి సంబంధించి మేము ఒక రోజులో చెప్తున్నాం. సో దిస్ ఈజ్ ఆల్ బికాస్ ఆఫ్ ద రివర్స్ ఇంజనీరింగ్ టెక్నిక్. బికాస్ మీరు ప్రతి వీడియో చూసినట్టయితే ఎండ్ లో ప్రీవియస్ ఇయర్ క్వశ్చన్స్ ప్రిలిమ్స్ చేస్తున్నాము, అలాగే ఒక క్వశ్చన్ మెయిన్స్ చేస్తున్నాం. సో ఇన్ ఆర్డర్ టు గెట్ డైలీ అప్డేట్స్ అట్ 7 o'clock షార్ప్ యాజ్ వీఆర్ డూయింగ్ ఇట్, సబ్స్క్రైబ్ చేసుకోండి, అలాగే బెల్ కూడా క్లిక్ చేయండి. సో దట్ 7 o'clock కి మీకు ఇమీడియట్ గా నోటిఫికేషన్ వస్తుంది.
UAE also features in the top 10 sources of FDI. So the government of UAE is actively investing in India under the FDI route. Both India and GCC are members of Financial Action Task Force. Saudi Arabia, Oman, Kuwait participate in India's mega multilateral Milan exercises. So there are some defense exercises conducted regularly. So along with India, Saudi Arabia, Oman and Kuwait also participate in Milan exercises. So to have a better understanding of interoperability of your defense forces. Oman has provided the Indian Navy access to Port of Duqm. Port of Duqm says it is a special economic zone, which is one of India's ocean largest deep sea ports, and at the same time to counter Chinese presence in this area. That's why the Port of Duqm says is very important. Sometimes these will be asked in your questions in geography and IR map based questions. Next one, what is Mecca Charter? Mecca Charter promotes moderate Islam, not extremist version, but moderate Islam, tolerance and coexist in the society. That is the major theme behind the Mecca Charter, which would enhance communal harmony. So Saudi Vision 2030, it has a given document, vision document, which just like how India wants to achieve a developed status by 2047, in a similar way, Saudi Arabia has come up with a Saudi Vision document by 2030. So which has Saudi green card, power and water subsidies will be provided, military spending and corruption. On the corruption front, what the Saudi Arabia government has taken, unemployment, and Aramco, one of the largest oil company from the Saudi Arabia, has actively stakes in India's infrastructure projects also. So that is the Saudi Vision document. So what are the core principles of Mecca Charter? Universal human dignity. The charter affirms that each and everyone are equal, regardless of their religion, race or nationality. So that is the universal human dignity. It completely rejects racial or ethnic claims of superiority. That is the first one. Next one, comprehensive citizenship. It establishes the legitimacy of modern nation states, encourage Muslims to be loyal, law-abiding citizens of their respective countries. So just like how different countries are promoting citizenship, investment-based citizenship, in a similar way, the countries especially have a larger population of Muslims are also expected to do in the future. This directly counters the extremist goal of international and borderless caliphate. So each and every country, especially the Muslim population countries, will also in future will promote this type of comprehensive citizenship. The charter condemns all forms of violence and terrorism. It rejects takfir, the practice where one Muslim faction declares another non-believer faqih to justify violence. So let's suppose one Muslim community is there and they are practicing their religion. Let's suppose on the side by there another religious practices are there. Then obviously for this Muslim community that will be kafirs. So these type of extremism, this type of violence, because they are not belong to Muslim community, should not happen in future. That is the rejection of extremism. The document stresses that societies must not marginalize women's role. So you should focus on women's empowerment also. And opportunities in religious, academic, political or social affairs, which advocating for equality of dignity and opportunity. Here, both equality of dignity for the women and at the same time opportunities are also given in the spheres of religious, academic, political and social affairs also. So that is the one aspect of women empowerment. It calls for global cooperation to protect the environment and urges countries to sign international climate treaties to safeguard the planet for future generations. Just like how developing nations and developed countries are fighting for climate justice, in a similar way, these countries are also in a sense that they want to protect the environment so that the future generations for this planet will be safeguarded. How it will be done? By making treaties with the different countries, by making responsible funds for the climate adaptation and mitigation. So that's why environmental stewardship will also comes from these countries. Next one, the global burden of disease report. So which is very important not only for your prelims perspective and for our general understanding of how diseases are spreading from one stage to another. It was released by the Lancet Medical Health Journal, which was popularly known as. Non-communicable diseases now account for nearly 2/3 of global deaths. Non-communicable diseases like your cardiovascular diseases, heart strokes, diabetes. So these are some of the non-communicable diseases have increasingly become the dominant causes of death in India, overtaking infectious diseases. So you don't need to worry about infectious diseases anymore. Rather than you most focus on your healthy dietary systems that you need to balance so that these non-communicable diseases should not be increased. From 1990 to 2023, NCDs have increasingly become the dominant cause of deaths in India, overtaking infectious diseases. So causes of the shift. What is the major cause of this shift from infectious to non-communicable diseases, NCD? The first one is demographic transition. Decline in fertility and rise in life expectancy. The fertility rates are declining and the rise in life expectancy have been increased. So when life expectancy is increased, obviously the lifespan of population will also increase, which makes aging population more prone to chronic diseases. So that is the first one, demographic transition. Urbanization and lifestyle changes. Most of us know sedentary lifestyles. We don't have any work to do. Mostly sitting on the computers and we will do our work. So where is the physical activity in our day-to-day life? That is the biggest worry for this LCDs. High calorie processed foods, Americanization or Coca-Colaization. Mostly highly processed foods, sugars and highly processed foods are encouraged. So it is a first gateway for your non-communicable diseases. And obviously alcohol and tobacco use also. Environmental factor, rising air population. If you go through NCR region in Delhi, obviously you might observe these rising air population, especially during these periods. Chemical exposures from the industries or plants and urban heat islands contribute to respiratory and cardiovascular illnesses. That is the environmental factors. Socio-economic development, shift from communicable disease control to lifestyle driven diseases. So in earlier cases, it was communicable diseases, mostly infectious. But now it is a lifestyle driven diseases. Mostly whatever the lifestyle that we have adapted, based on that lifestyle, we have diseases also. So in earlier cases, it was infectious, but not now. Health system evolution, success in immunization and sanitation reduced infectious diseases. So because of immunization programs and sanitation in the societies, it has reduced infectious diseases. But preventive systems for NCDs lag. Prevention is better than cure. That is the best formula for our health, right? For these infectious diseases, because of sanitization and immunization, it has completely reduced. But what about the diseases? For the lifestyle diseases, lifestyle demand driven diseases, there is no preventive cure. There are no suggestive measures that have been taken by governments. That is the biggest issue. Implications. What will be the implications of this high mortality? NCDs disproportionately affect people in low and middle income countries, especially the people are living in low and middle income countries. These are disproportionately affected, where nearly 3/4 of global NCD deaths occur. From these regions, 3/4 of global NCD deaths occurs because of high mortality. Economic burden. NCDs cost India nearly $250 billion in productivity loss annually, according to WHO estimates. Out-of-pocket health expenditure remains more than 50%. So here, both for the perspective of governments and for the perspective of individuals, it has a loss. Healthcare system pressure. Chronic disease management. Let's suppose diabetes or heart cardiovascular diseases or asthma. So repeated and recurring visits to the healthcare systems is necessary, right? So which requires long-term care, diagnostics and infrastructure, which will put additional pressure on already existing healthcare. Social consequences. Middle-aged population are affected, which eventually affecting working age demographic dividend. Let's suppose 40 to 50, this is the middle age. Let's suppose if these population were affected with this non-cardiac NCD, then obviously their productivity will be affected, and which will have a negative effect on economy also. Reduced quality of life. NCDs often lead to disability, mental health challenges, and social isolation. Because of these reasons, the quality of life will be compromised. Global health commitments. India's progress towards SDG, Sustainable Development Goals 3.4, which has reduced to premature mortality from NCDs by 1/3 by 2030, which remains very slow. So on one hand, we are encouraging these NCDs by making Americanization or Coca-Colization. On the other hand, sustainable development goals that we need to achieve by 2030. But it is a very long and distant dream. What are the steps taken by government? The National Program for Prevention and Control of Non-Communicable Disease. That is the one aspect which supports the screening, early diagnostics and the treatment at district and community levels. That is the steps taken by government. Ayushman Bharat Health and Wellness Centers promote preventive care and lifestyle counseling. So if you ever visit these health and wellness centers, what they will do, they will simply screen and diagnose your early stages of diseases, so that it will be preventive care, and at the same time they will give a lifestyle counseling also, how to lead a better life. Pradhan Mantri Bharatiya Jan Aushadhi Pariyojana, which provides affordable medicines, just like generics. In a similar way, the government is actively promoting generic medicines at affordable prices, because rising of public out of pocket expenditures are very high in the country. For cardiovascular, diabetic and cancer care, these are some of the diseases for which the Pradhan Mantri Jan Aushadhi Pariyojana provides affordable treatments. Fit India movement and Eat Right India movement encourages healthier lifestyles. So whatever the decisions that have been taken by government to promote healthier lifestyle, that not start with them, that start with you, yourself only. You should focus on your health, not governments regularly intervene. Next one, IMF and its prediction. IMF has projected India's GDP growth at 6.6 for 2025. Good. 6.2 for 2026. Because of strong performance in manufacturing, services and construction activities. These were the where the India is performing very well despite global trade tensions. So what were the global trade tensions? USA tariffs, Russia-Ukraine conflicts, and Middle East escalations. So these are all affecting our trade dynamics. And tariff hikes. India remains the fastest growing major economy. So India and the IMF, what is the relation between India and IMF? India is a founding member of the IMF. World Bank and IMF, these are the Bretton Woods institutions. Obviously, India has actively participated in these foundations. India current projection growth 6%, IMF estimate. India's quota, IMF is based on the quota, 7% giving based on the available data from IMF. 7% quota has given to India. So obviously, it has a stronger voice among emerging countries or South, especially South-South cooperation. The IMF supports India in areas like fiscal management. So these IMF, especially IMF, when it will be come into the picture. So whenever any balance of payments are crisis, so obviously at that time it will take loans for the bailout of your current account deficits. Banking reform, sometimes it will suggest banking reforms and digital financial inclusion. So that is the IMF, how it will support India. So implications of current projections for India. What will be the implications for current projections of IMF for India? India remains the fastest major growing economy in the world. So that's sound good. Strong growth in manufacturing, construction and services will attract foreign investment. So because we have very stable policies, economic policies regarding manufacturing, construction and services, obviously you can expect more foreign direct investments in the country. So that's a good sign. The global economy is stable but fragile due to trade tensions. Because of, let's suppose if you take an example of United States tariffs, geopolitical issues on the Middle East and Russia-Ukraine conflict, sometimes even China with 9-line South China Sea disputes among the different countries, and high borrowing cost. So these were the issues. Opportunity for India to capture supply chains shifting away from the China. Indian exporters can benefit. How can they will be benefited? Because with Asian, Africa and Europe, different types of preferential trade agreements, free trade agreements, these were already in pipeline. So obviously you can export your products to different countries rather than only stick to one country. India may need to maintain a balanced monetary policy, keeping inflation in check while supporting growth. So the RBI might adopt a cautious stance on interest rates. Interest rates always plays a major role in economy, right? Let's suppose if you increase the interest rates, private players or private investments should not take place in the economy. But it will be better for who have the savings in their accounts. So obviously growth and inflation, that should be the motto of RBI's monetary policy also, because they have to take very cautious approach. So Indian economy wants to grow majorly. At the same time, there are some blocks. That blocks will be very carefully and cautiously met by RBI. Sustainable investments in clean energy and green technology, diversification of exports and strengthening domestic demands. These are some of the areas where India needs to focus more. Challenges in attaining IMF growth projection. What are the different challenges? Rising geopolitical sanctions, Ukraine, Russia, since from 2022, the war efforts are going on. Middle East conflicts, supply chain disruptions. So whenever any disputes arising in Red Sea, right? So obviously the supply chains will be disrupted to most extent, and fluctuating oil prices to continue impact trade. There is a one group, OPEC and OPEC Plus. These are the cartels. So they will decide the future of oil as of now. India's merchandise exports dropped by 5% year on year due to weaker global demand, because the world is facing different turmoils and different context, whether it should be political, whether it should be economical, whether it should be military. So some of the countries are facing military issues. So if you take a recent example of Nepal, there was Genji protest. So at that protest time, obviously you should not expect more demands from India. And there is Middle East tensions. Middle East also we are exporting some products. So whenever there are constant wars, constant issues, then our exports will also affect. The government's push for capital expenditure and welfare schemes has increased fiscal burden. India's fiscal deficit is estimated at 1% of GDP, leaving less room for stimulus spending. So if you more and more take loans and you are obviously kept it for your welfare schemes, then obviously there is less room for spending on capital expenditure. So that is also India needs to take care. Food and fuel prices remain volatile due to uneven monsoons and global oil fluctuations. That's why if you take an example, when you considering CPI and WPI, right, like consumer price index and WPI index, food and fuel, these are the main culprits for understanding our CPI, right? Retail inflation averaged in financial year 2025 with 3%, slightly above RBI's comfort zone of 4%. Weak external demand and global trade protection are affecting export-oriented industries, obviously. So we are exporting some products from India. So let's suppose the tariffs have been increased on our imports, then the export-driven sectors will affected. Industrial growth already slowed. Delays in logistics and transport connectivity and power infrastructure, which hampers the industrial efficiency. So the logistics sectors, transport connectivity and power infrastructure, which definitely affect the industrial efficiency. Logistic cost in India is 13% GDP, which has more than China's 8%, right? Unpredictable weather patterns, floods and heat waves impact agriculture and their productivity, and at the same time energy supply, because we are now E20 season, right? Ethanol blended program of 20%. Agriculture output already fell due to the erratic rainfall. So that is the discussion for this week international relations topics. Let's try to understand one practice question. The Mecca Charter, frequently seen in the news, is a document focused on Islamic economic law and trade agreements, a new universal code of Islamic law, promoting principles of moderate Islam, coexistence and tolerance, the rules and rituals for the annual Hajj pilgrimage. So already we have discussed this. Mecca Charter is nothing but principle of moderate Islam and coexistence with another religions also, and tolerance towards all other religions. So that is the answer. The charter core purpose is to contemporary challenges by reforming moral principles of Islam, justice, tolerance, human dignity, and promoting coexistence in pluralistic societies. So that is the Mecca Charter that was frequently seen in news. So hope you enjoy the session and you have cleared all your doubts from this international relations perspective. If you really like our content, please share it to the friends and your fellow aspirants so that it can reach whoever the needy people. Thank you for watching class. Have a nice day. We will meet you in next session.
CivicCentre IAS is offering Telangana Group 1 Prelims cum Mains classes as well as Andhra Pradesh Group 1 Prelims cum Mains classes in English medium for a period of 8 to 10 months. This also covers the complete NCERT textbooks and statewide textbooks. So, what are you waiting for? Learn through reverse engineering technique today. Admissions are in progress. Join now. Visit our website. Thank you.